My narcissist husband slapped me when I told him I was 4 months pregnant. My name is Natalie, and I'm 29 years old. The moment his hand connected with my face, I felt something inside me break. Not my spirit, something else. Something that had been holding me back. I didn't cry. I just stared at him. Garrett stood there, his hand still raised, his face twisted in this ugly expression I'd seen 1,000 times, but never quite like this. His eyes were wide, almost surprised at what he'd done, but not sorry, never sorry. You did this on purpose, he said. His voice was shaking. You got pregnant on purpose to trap me. I touched my cheek. It was hot, burning. I could already feel it starting to swell. I'm your wife, Garrett. We've been married for 3 years. I told you I wasn't ready for kids. I told you we'd talk about it later, but you couldn't wait, could you? You had to go behind my back and sabotage the protection. The thing is, I hadn't. We'd stopped being careful about 6 months ago. He'd said it was fine. He'd said whatever happens, happens. He'd even smiled when he said it, pulling me close and kissing my forehead. But now, standing in our kitchen with my face stinging and my hand instinctively moving to my stomach, I realized he'd been lying. About that. About everything. I picked up my phone from the counter. What are you doing? He asked. His tone shifted. Softer now. Manipulative. The tone he used when he wanted something. Calling my sister. He lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. Hard. Hard enough that I gasped. You're not telling anyone about this. Do you understand me? Let go of me. Natalie, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean it. You just shocked me with the news. I wasn't ready to hear it. You know how I get when I'm surprised. You should have picked a better time to tell me. There it was. Already making it my fault. Already twisting things so that somehow I was responsible for his violence. I looked down at his hand on my wrist. At the white pressure marks his fingers were making on my skin. At the way his thumb was digging into the soft underside of my forearm. Then I looked up at his face. Let go. Something in my voice must have gotten through, because he released me. I stepped back, putting the kitchen island between us. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I'm going to Michelle's house, I said. My sister, don't call me. Don't text me. Don't come looking for me. Natalie, come on. Don't be dramatic. We can talk about this. We're adults. We're married. This is what married people do. They have disagreements, and they work through them. You hit me, Garrett. You hit your pregnant wife. I barely touched you. Get away from me. His face changed again. The mask slipped. For just a second, I saw pure rage underneath. You walk out that door, and you're making a huge mistake. You think you can make it without me? You think anyone else is going to want you? I grabbed my purse and my keys and walked out. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock my car, but I did it. I got in. I started the engine. I didn't look back. Michelle opened her door before I even knocked. She must have seen my car pull up from the window. What happened? She asked. And then she saw my face. The handprint was already visible, angry and red against my pale skin. Oh my God, Natalie. I started crying then. Not because of the slap, because I'd finally admitted to myself what I'd known for months, maybe years. My husband didn't love me. He probably never had. Michelle pulled me inside and sat me down on her couch. Her husband, Ryan, appeared in the doorway with their 1-year-old son, Lucas, on his hip. He took one look at my face, and his expression darkened. I'm going to put Lucas down for his nap, he said quietly. Call me if you need anything. He knew when to give us space. Michelle disappeared into the kitchen and came back with ice wrapped in a dish towel. She pressed it gently against my cheek. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. I told her about the pregnancy, about how excited I'd been when I took the test, about how I'd planned this whole special way to tell Garrett. I'd bought a little onesie that said, "Hello, Daddy," and wrapped it in a box. I'd made his favorite dinner. I'd lit candles. I told her how his face had fallen when he opened the box, how he'd just stared at the onesie for a long moment before looking up at me with cold eyes. Is this some kind of joke? He'd asked. No, I'm really pregnant. 4 months. I wanted to be sure before I told you. That's when he'd started yelling, accusing me of trapping him, of ruining his life, of being selfish and manipulative. And when I'd tried to calm him down, tried to remind him that we'd agreed to stop preventing pregnancy, he'd slapped me. Michelle's face got darker and darker as I talked. Natalie, she said when I finally stopped. You know this is abuse, right? I did. Of course I did. But hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I kept thinking it would get better, I whispered. I kept thinking if I just tried harder, if I just did things right, he'd be happy. He'd love me the way I loved him. That's what they want you to think, that it's your fault. But it's not, Natalie. It was never your fault. But then I kept going. I told her about all the other stuff. The stuff I'd been too embarrassed to share before. The stuff I'd minimized and explained away and pretended wasn't that bad. How Garrett criticized everything I did. How I cooked wrong, even when I followed his mother's recipes exactly. How I cleaned wrong, even though I spent hours making sure everything was perfect. How I dressed wrong, too frumpy or too revealing, never just right. How nothing I did was ever good enough. How he'd isolated me from my friends over the past 3 years, always finding some reason why each one of them was bad for me, toxic, jealous, using me. I told her about Rebecca, my best friend from college, who Garrett had convinced me was trying to break us up because she was jealous of our relationship. About Emily from work, who he'd said was a bad influence because she was divorced. About Katie from my book club, who he'd claimed was hitting on him behind my back. One by one, he'd made me cut them all out of my life, and I'd done it because I'd believed him, because I'd thought he was trying to protect me. How he controlled all our money, even though I worked full-time as a dental hygienist. How I had to ask permission to buy anything over $20. How he checked my bank statements every week and demanded explanations for every single purchase, even coffee or lunch. How he'd convinced me to quit my previous job because my male boss was obviously attracted to me. How how my boss, a kind man in his 60s who was happily married with grandchildren, had apparently been making inappropriate comments. Comments I'd never heard. Comments that, according to Garrett, were subtle, and I was too naive to notice. How he'd made me delete all my social media accounts because other men might message me, and he didn't want to deal with the disrespect. How I'd lost touch with even more friends because of it. How he tracked my location on my phone and called me repeatedly if I deviated from my expected route home. If I stopped for gas or went to a different grocery store, I had to explain why. Had to prove I wasn't lying. How he read my text messages, my emails. How he'd installed some kind of monitoring software on my laptop that I wasn't supposed to know about, but I'd found it one day when my computer was running slow. How he timed how long I took in the shower. How he questioned me if I shaved my legs because who are you getting ready for? How he made me feel dirty and ashamed of my own body. How he didn't let me see my family without him present. How he always found an excuse to come along to dinner at my parents' house, to coffee with Michelle, to any family gathering. And when he was there, he'd hold my hand and play the perfect husband while his thumb pressed warning circles against my palm. How I'd started lying to everyone, covering for him, making excuses, pretending everything was fine. Michelle's hands were shaking by the time I finished. There were tears running down her face. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because I was ashamed, I said. Because I didn't want anyone to know what a failure I was, and because part of me still loved him, or I loved who I thought he was in the beginning. Oh, Natalie, I kept thinking about when we first met. How charming he was. How attentive. How he made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. How could that person turn into this? He didn't turn into anything, Michelle said firmly. That was always who he was. The beginning was an act. This is the real him. I spent that night at Michelle's house, and the next night, and the one after that. Garrett called 47 times the first day. I counted. He left voicemails that ranged from apologetic to angry to threatening. I didn't listen to all of them. Michelle did though. She listened to every single one, and her jaw got tighter with each message. The apologetic ones. Baby, please call me back. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I love you so much. You and the baby, you're my whole world. Please, just come home and we'll talk about this. We'll figure it out together. The angry ones. You know what, Natalie? This is typical. You always overreact to everything. I barely touched you and you're acting like I beat you or something. You're being ridiculous. Grow up. The threatening ones. If you think you're going to take my child away from me, you're wrong. I'll fight you on this. I'll make sure everyone knows what you're really like. No judge is going to give custody to a woman who abandons her husband over nothing. We're documenting all of this, Michelle said. You're going to need it. On the fourth day, I went back to our apartment. Michelle came with me. So did Ryan. Garrett was at work. I'd checked his calendar on the shared family app he'd insisted we use to stay connected. He had a meeting that would last until at least 4 p.m. I packed everything I cared about, which turned out to be less than I expected. Most of my life with Garrett had been about what he wanted, what he liked, what made him comfortable. I took my clothes, the ones he approved of anyway. He'd thrown away so many of my outfits over the years. Too tight, too short, too revealing, too professional, always too something. I took my books, the ones he'd let me keep. He'd gotten rid of most of my romance novels early in our relationship, saying they gave me unrealistic expectations. My fantasy novels were childish. My thrillers were too dark. I took the jewelry box my grandmother left me when she passed away 2 years ago. Garrett had wanted me to sell the vintage pieces because we could use the money, but I'd refused. It was one of the only times I'd stood my ground. I took photos from before I met Garrett, my childhood albums, pictures from college, my high school yearbooks. I left my engagement ring on the kitchen counter, the ring Garrett had proposed with, a ring he'd chosen without asking me what I liked, a ring that had never quite felt like mine. We were loading the last box into Michelle's car when Garrett's black Audi pulled into the parking lot. He got out slowly. His face was unreadable. He was still in his work clothes, a crisp button-down and slacks, looking every bit the successful marketing executive he appeared to be. What's going on, he asked, even though it was obvious. I'm leaving, I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. No, you're not. He started walking toward us. His footsteps were measured, controlled. You're my wife. You're carrying my child. You're not going anywhere. Ryan stepped forward, positioning himself between Garrett and me. She is going somewhere. Back off. Garrett looked at Ryan like he was noticing him for the first time. This doesn't concern you, Ryan. This is between me and my wife. It does when you're threatening my sister-in-law. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm talking to my wife. Natalie, tell them. Tell them this is just a misunderstanding. I stepped out from behind Ryan. It's not a misunderstanding. I'm leaving you, Garrett. For good. His mask slipped again. Just for a second. You can't leave me. You have nothing without me. No money, no job, no friends. I made you. Everything you have is because of me. That's not true. Yes, it is. You were nobody when I met you. A nobody with a nothing job and no prospects. I gave you a life. I gave you everything. Michelle stepped forward. You gave her nothing but misery. And now it's over. Garrett ignored her. His eyes were locked on mine. Natalie, please. Let's go inside and talk about this privately. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I can change. I will change. Just give me another chance. For a second. Just a second. I wavered. Because that's what years of manipulation does to you. It makes you doubt yourself even when you know you're right. But then I thought about the baby. About the tiny life growing inside me. About bringing a child into a house where this man lived. About my daughter or son learning that this is what love looks like. No, I said. There are no more chances. We're done. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was marrying you." Something flickered across Garrett's face. Fury. "You're going to regret this. Mark my words. You'll come crawling back, and when you do, I won't be here." "Good," I said. I got in Michelle's car. Ryan got in the driver's seat. Michelle paused before getting in the passenger side. "If you come near her," she told Garrett, her voice low and dangerous. "If you contact her, if you even think about her, I will make sure everyone knows what you did. Your family, your coworkers, everyone." We drove away. I watched Garrett in the side mirror, standing alone in the parking lot, getting smaller and smaller until he disappeared. That night, I lay awake in Michelle's guest room, my hand on my stomach, feeling the tiny flutters of movement that had just started a few days ago. "I'm going to keep you safe," I whispered. "I promise." I filed for divorce the next week. The lawyer Michelle recommended was a woman named Victoria Chen. She was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Tell me everything," she said at our first meeting. I did. I showed her the photos of my bruised face and wrist. I played her the voicemails. I gave her a timeline of the relationship, all the red flags I'd ignored, all the ways Garrett had controlled and manipulated me. Victoria listened to everything with a neutral expression. Then she looked up at me. "We're going to bury him," she said. "Garrett fought the divorce." Of course he did. He hired an expensive lawyer, a man named Richard Chambers, who had a reputation for being ruthless in family law. They claimed I was unstable, that I was making up the abuse allegations to gain sympathy, that I was trying to keep his child from him out of spite. They brought up the fact that I'd been seeing a therapist, used it as evidence that I was mentally unwell. Never mind that I'd only started therapy because of the abuse, that my therapist would testify on my behalf. They brought up the social media accounts I'd deleted, claimed I'd been having online affairs, and that's why I deleted the evidence. They claimed I'd gotten pregnant intentionally to manipulate him into staying in a relationship he wanted to leave, that he'd been planning to divorce me, and I'd sabotaged the protection to trap him. It was all lies, but Garrett sold them well. He played the victim perfectly, the successful man trapped by a scheming, unstable woman who'd deliberately gotten pregnant to ensure she'd get his money in a divorce. But here's the thing about narcissists. They're so convinced of their own brilliance that they get sloppy. I had documentation, years of it, texts where Garrett berated me for hours over minor things, hundreds of them, screenshots of him calling me worthless, stupid, incompetent, ugly, emails where he detailed exactly how I'd failed him that day, how I'd disappointed him, how lucky I was that he stayed with me despite my many flaws. Photos Michelle had secretly taken over the years, showing bruises I'd explained away as clumsiness, a split lip from when I'd walked into a door, a black eye from when I'd fallen down the stairs, and then there were the voicemails he'd left after I moved out, the ones where he threatened to make sure I regretted this, where he said he'd destroy me if I didn't come back, where he called me every vile name he could think of. My lawyer, Victoria, listened to everything with a neutral expression. Then she looked up at me. "We're going to bury him," she said again. "He's given us everything we need." But that's when things got weird. 2 months into the divorce proceedings, Victoria called me. Her voice was different, excited. "Can you come to my office? There's something you need to see, and you might want to bring your sister." I went. Michelle came with me. Victoria had papers spread across her desk and her laptop open. "I've been doing some digging into Garrett's finances," she said, "for the asset division, and I found something interesting." She pushed a document toward me. It was a bank statement for an account I'd never seen before, an account at a bank I didn't recognize. "Garrett has been moving money," Victoria said. "A lot of money, into offshore accounts." "How much money?" "Over the past 2 years? Close to $400,000. I stared at her. "That's impossible. We don't have that kind of money. I can barely get him to approve $20 for groceries." "You don't. But apparently he does." She showed me more documents, shell companies with names that meant nothing to me, cryptocurrency transactions, investment accounts in the Cayman Islands, wire transfers to banks in Panama and Switzerland. "Where did he get all this?" I asked. My head was spinning. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. His salary at the marketing firm is good, but not this good. Base of $120,000 plus commission. Even in a great year, he shouldn't have this much to hide." Michelle leaned forward. "So where did it come from? That's the question. Either he's been embezzling from his employer, or he has another source of income he hasn't disclosed." My stomach dropped. "You think he's been stealing from his company? I think it's a possibility we need to explore. I'm going to need to bring in a forensic accountant." I went home to Michelle's house in a daze. $400,000. Where had Garrett gotten that kind of money? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about our marriage, about the last 3 years, about all the times Garrett had been working late or had business trips that seemed vague when I asked about details. I thought about his friends, the guys he played poker with every Thursday night, how he'd always been secretive about those games, telling me it was guy time and I wouldn't understand, how he'd sometimes come home with thousands in cash and other times claim he'd lost everything. And then I remembered something else. About a year ago, Garrett came home from one of those poker nights really drunk, unusually drunk. He was laughing, stumbling, barely coherent. "You should have seen it, babe," he'd slurred. "So easy. Taking money from idiots is so easy." I'd helped him to bed, assuming he'd had a big win at poker. But what if it was something else? What if he wasn't playing poker at all? The next morning, I called Victoria. "The poker games," I said. "Every Thursday night. Can we look into those? What about them?" "I don't know, but something feels off. He was always so secretive about them, and sometimes he'd come home with a lot of cash." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I'll see what I can find." 3 days later, she called me back. "You're going to want to sit down for this." I sat on Michelle's couch, my phone pressed to my ear. "Garrett hasn't been playing poker," Victoria said. "At least, not traditional poker." "What do you mean? I hired a private investigator. He followed Garrett last Thursday. Garrett went to a warehouse in the industrial district, near the docks. It's an illegal gambling operation. High-stakes poker, sports betting, and some other games. They also deal substances on the side. My blood went cold. Substances. The PI got photos. Garrett was there for 4 hours. He was seen in a back room with some known dealers. And when he left, he was carrying a briefcase. Oh my God, there's more. I cross-referenced the dates of his poker nights with the deposits in his offshore accounts. They line up. Every Thursday, like clockwork, there's a deposit. Sometimes 10,000, sometimes 20, once 50,000. He's laundering money, I said. It wasn't a question. It looks that way. The forensic accountant agrees. The pattern is too consistent to be legitimate gambling winnings. What do we do? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Officially, I have to advise you to report this to the authorities. If Garrett is involved in illegal activity, especially substance-related, it could be dangerous for you and your baby. And unofficially, we use this to make sure you get everything you're entitled to in the divorce. And then we report it anyway. I thought about it. About Garrett and his perfect exterior, his expensive clothes and his nice car and his job at the marketing firm where everyone thought he was brilliant and charming. About how he'd hidden this entire other life from me. About how he'd made me feel small and worthless and crazy while he was literally a criminal. About how he'd hit me, put his hands on me while I was pregnant with his child. Let's destroy him, I said. The next week, we went to court for a preliminary hearing. Garrett showed up in a designer suit, navy blue with a subtle pinstripe. His tie was perfect. His shoes were polished. He looked like the picture of success and respectability. He was confident, smug. He thought he had everything under control. His lawyer, Richard Chambers, presented their case with practiced ease. I was mentally unstable, they claimed. I had a history of anxiety and depression. I was making false abuse allegations out of spite because Garrett had expressed doubts about the pregnancy. The pregnancy was a manipulation tactic, they said. I'd deliberately gotten pregnant to trap Garrett in a marriage he wanted to leave. They had evidence that I'd been researching how to get pregnant when they showed messages I'd sent to Michelle, asking about prenatal vitamins months before I'd actually conceived. They wanted full custody once the baby was born, claiming I was unfit to be a mother due to my mental health issues and dishonesty. Richard Chambers was good. I'll give him that. He painted me as a conniving, desperate woman who'd stop at nothing to ruin a good man's life. Then Victoria stood up. Your Honor, she said calmly, I'd like to present evidence of Mr. Sutton's undisclosed assets. She laid out everything. The bank statements, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, page after page of financial documents that told a very different story than the one Garrett and his lawyer were selling. Garrett's face went white, then red, then white again. Richard Chambers scrambled. Your Honor, we were unaware of these accounts. This is clearly some kind of mistake. Is it also a mistake that these accounts show regular deposits coinciding with Mr. Sutton's involvement in illegal gambling operations? Victoria asked smoothly. Because I have photographic evidence of that as well. She put photos on the projector. Garrett entering the warehouse. Garrett leaving with a briefcase. Garrett shaking hands with known criminals. Garrett in what appeared to be a counting room with stacks of cash on a table. The courtroom was silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The judge, a severe woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Morrison, looked at Garrett over her glasses. Mr. Sutton, do you have an explanation for this? Garrett couldn't speak. He just sat there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. His perfect composure completely shattered. I'll take that as a no, Judge Morrison said dryly. I'm granting Mrs. Sutton's request for an emergency protective order. Mr. Sutton, you are not to contact your wife in any way. You are not to come within 500 feet of her, and I'm ordering a complete forensic accounting of all your assets, foreign and domestic. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. Garrett tried to catch my eye as we left the courtroom. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes forward, my hand protectively over my growing stomach, but it wasn't over. Not even close. 2 days later, Victoria called again. She sounded excited, more excited than I'd ever heard her. The forensic accountants found something else, she said. Natalie, you need to sit down for this. I was already sitting. What is it? Garrett has a second family. I almost dropped the phone. What? In Portland. A woman named Chelsea. They have a 5-year-old daughter together. Her name is Lily. I couldn't breathe. The room spun. Michelle, who was sitting next to me, grabbed my hand. 5 years? I managed to say. He's been with her since before he met you. They met at a marketing conference in 2018. You met Garrett in 2020, right? Yes, at a coffee shop. He said it was fate. He's been with Chelsea the entire time. The whole time he was dating you. The whole time you were married. Everything. The phone felt heavy in my hand. Does she know about me? According to the investigator, no. She thinks she's his only wife, his only partner. But we're legally married. Exactly. Which means whatever relationship he has with Chelsea, it's not legal. But even if they're not legally married, he's been supporting 2 families with illegal money. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. It was all so absurd. So ridiculous. Here I'd been, thinking I was the problem, thinking I wasn't good enough, thinking if I could just be better, try harder, be the woman he wanted, everything would be okay. And all along there was another woman, another family, another whole life I knew nothing about. Are you okay? Victoria asked. I'm fine, I said through my laughter, which was starting to sound a little hysterical. I'm just thinking about how Garrett used to accuse me of being unfaithful if I so much as smiled at a waiter, how he'd interrogate me if I was 5 minutes late coming home from work, how he made me feel like I was always doing something wrong. And all along, people like Garrett always project, Victoria said quietly. They accuse you of the things they're doing themselves. I want to meet her, I said suddenly. Chelsea, I want to meet her. Natalie, I don't think that's that's a good idea. Why not? She deserves to know the truth, and I need to see this for myself. I need to see that I wasn't crazy, that this wasn't all in my head. Victoria sighed. Fine, but I'm coming with you, and so is your sister. We flew to Portland the following week. I was 5 months pregnant by then, definitely showing. Michelle insisted on coming, saying there was no way she was letting me do this alone. The investigator had given us Chelsea's address. She lived in a nice townhouse in a suburban neighborhood called Bethany. Very family-friendly. There were kids playing on the street, a park on the corner, white picket fences. Chelsea's townhouse was cream-colored with blue shutters. There was a pink bicycle in the front yard, complete with training wheels and streamers on the handlebars. A welcome mat that said "Home Sweet Home." It looked perfect. It looked like everything I'd thought I had. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribcage. A woman answered. She was pretty, with long brown hair pulled into a ponytail and tired eyes. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt. She was holding a dish towel and had what looked like flour on her cheek. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was friendly but cautious, probably wondering who these three strange women were on her doorstep. "Are you Chelsea?" I asked. "Yes, my name is Natalie Sutton. I'm Garrett Sutton's wife." Her face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, realization, horror. "That's not possible," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm Garrett's partner. We've been together for 6 years." "No," I said as gently as I could. "You're not his wife. Because he's already married to me. We got married 3 years ago in California, in a courthouse in San Diego." He cried during the vows. She gripped the doorframe. Her knuckles went white. "You're lying. You have to be lying." I pulled out my phone and showed her our wedding photos. Me in a simple white dress. Garrett in a gray suit. Both of us smiling. His arm around my waist. Our marriage license. Photos from our honeymoon in Maui. Her face crumpled. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." "Can we come in?" Michelle asked gently. "We should talk, and you might want to sit down." Chelsea let us in with shaking hands. Her townhouse was beautiful, tastefully decorated. Photos of her and a little girl everywhere. A few photos of Garrett too, but not many. I wondered if that had been his choice. Her daughter was at school, she said. First grade. She'd be home in about an hour. She offered us coffee with automatic politeness, then seemed to forget she'd offered it. We all sat in her living room, the silence heavy and awkward. "How long have you been with Garrett?" I asked. 6 years, Chelsea said. Her voice was hollow, like she was somewhere far away. "We met at a marketing conference in Seattle. He was so charming, so attentive. He said he'd never met anyone like me before. I felt like I'd been punched. He said the same thing to me. We started dating long distance. He told me he lived in Portland but traveled a lot for work. Corporate consulting, he said. He'd visit once or twice a month. Then I got pregnant with Lily, and he said he'd move here to be with us. But he didn't move," I said. "No," he said, "the company wouldn't transfer him, but it was okay. We could make it work. He'd visit as often as he could, support us financially, be the best father he could be from a distance." Michelle made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Does he live here?" Victoria asked, her lawyer brain kicking in. "No, he stays here about a week every month, sometimes less. He has his own apartment in San Diego," he said, "for work. He's always traveling. Dallas, Chicago, New York, San Diego, always some city for some project." "What does he tell you he does?" I asked. "He works in tech marketing, high-level corporate consulting. He's always flying to different cities for projects, big companies that need his expertise." Michelle shook her head. "Unbelievable." "Chelsea," I said, "there's more you need to know." I told her everything, about the abuse, about the control, about how Garrett had isolated me from everyone I cared about the slap when I told him I was pregnant. I told her about the gambling, about the money laundering, about the offshore accounts and the criminal investigation that was starting to unfold. With every word, Chelsea seemed to shrink further into herself, her eyes filled with tears that spilled over and ran down her cheeks. "He gave me money," she said quietly, "for Lily, for the house, for everything. He said he wanted to take care of us. I thought he was just successful. I thought," she broke off, sobbing. "He is successful," Victoria said, "at being a criminal and a liar." Chelsea looked up at me, really looked at me, at my face, at my hand on my swollen belly. "Are you really pregnant?" I nodded. 5 months. A girl. He told me he couldn't have children. After Lily was born, he said the stress of our situation had made him sterile, that he'd seen doctors, that there was no chance of him ever having another child. The lies just kept coming, layer after layer after layer. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know this is a lot, too much, but you deserve to know the truth." "Why did you come here?" Chelsea asked. "What do you want from me?" "The truth," I said. "And maybe an ally. We both got played by the same man. We both trusted him, loved him, built our lives around him. But we don't have to let him get away with it." Chelsea was quiet for a long time. She stared at the coffee table, at the magazines arranged neatly there. Better Homes and Gardens, Parents Magazine, a catalog from a children's clothing store. Then she stood up and went to a desk in the corner. She came back with a laptop. "Garrett keeps files here," she said. Her voice was different now, harder. "He thinks I don't know the password, but I figured it out 6 months ago." She opened the laptop and typed in a password. "I've been suspicious for a while. Little things didn't add up. He was always so secretive, so I started looking." She turned the laptop toward us. On the screen were folders full of documents, spreadsheets with numbers I didn't understand, encrypted files with names like Accounts 2023 and transactions offshore. "I couldn't make sense of most of it," Chelsea said. "I'm not a financial person, but I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what to do about it." Victoria leaned forward, her eyes widening. "May I?" Chelsea nodded. Victoria spent the next hour going through the files, files, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. Michelle and I sat with Chelsea, who cried quietly into a cup of tea that had gone cold. I put my hand on her arm. I know this is overwhelming. I know it hurts, but you're going to be okay. We're both going to be okay. How can you know that? Because we're out. We know the truth now, and the truth might hurt, but at least it's real. At least we're not living in his fantasy anymore. Chelsea nodded, wiping her eyes. I should have known. There were so many signs, but I didn't want to see them. I know the feeling. This is everything, Victoria finally said. She looked up from the laptop, her expression a mixture of shock and satisfaction. Bank records, transaction logs, names and dates. There's enough here to put Garrett away for a very long time. Good, Chelsea said. Her voice was hard now, angry. He deserves it. Will you testify? I asked. In my divorce? And if there's a criminal case? Chelsea looked at me. Her eyes were red but clear, determined. Yes, absolutely yes. I'll tell them everything. We stayed in Portland for 3 more days. Victoria needed time to copy all the files from Garrett's laptop and to get a formal statement from Chelsea. The private investigator came and took more photos, documented everything. Chelsea and I had coffee on the second day, just the two of us. We sat in a cafe near her house and talked. What was he like with you? She asked. At the beginning? Perfect, I said. Charming, attentive. He made me feel like I was the most important person in the world, like nothing else mattered but us. Same, Chelsea said. He'd send me flowers at work, leave little notes around my apartment, cook me dinner, tell me I was beautiful. When did it change? Slowly. So slowly I didn't notice at first. He started having opinions about what I wore, who I spent time with, how I spent my money. Little criticisms disguised as concern or helpfulness. And then the criticisms got bigger. Yes, and more frequent, until I felt like I couldn't do anything right. But with Lily, he was a good father. I mean, he wasn't around much, but when he was here, he was good with her. I thought about that, about the baby growing inside me, about whether Garrett would be a good father to her. Do you think he loved us? I asked. Either of us? Chelsea was quiet for a long time. I think he loved the idea of us, the control, having these separate lives that he could manage. It made him feel powerful. Yeah, I said. I think you're right. On the 3rd day, we went to a park. Chelsea brought Lily. I wanted to meet her, this little girl who was my baby's half-sister. Lily was beautiful, 5 years old, with Garrett's dark hair and Chelsea's eyes. She was shy at first, hiding behind her mother's legs, but she warmed up when I showed her a picture of an ultrasound. That's a baby? She asked, her eyes wide. Yes, she's growing in my belly, like I was in mommy's belly, exactly like that. When will she come out? In about 4 more months. Can I meet her? I looked at Chelsea, who nodded. Maybe, I said, if it's okay with your mom. Lily smiled. She had a gap where she'd lost a tooth. I want to meet her. I want to be a big sister. My heart broke a little. This innocent child, caught in the middle of her father's lies. We flew back to California on the 4th day. Chelsea promised to keep in touch, to let us know if Garrett tried to contact her, to testify when the time came. As we left, she hugged me. Thank you, she said, for telling me the truth. It hurts, but I needed to know. Me too, I said. A week later, Garrett was arrested. It happened at his office. Federal agents walked in during a team meeting and put him in handcuffs in front of all his colleagues, his boss, his subordinates, everyone. The charges were extensive: money laundering, tax evasion, fraud, association with organized crime, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. I found out from the news. Someone from his office had filmed the arrest and posted it online. It went viral. Thousands of shares, millions of views. I watched the video once, just once. Garrett looked so small in those handcuffs, so shocked, like he'd genuinely believed he'd never face consequences, like he thought he was too smart to get caught. His perfectly styled hair was mussed, his tie was crooked, his face was pale. He looked at the camera once, and I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Then my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer. Hello? Natalie? It's me, Garrett. He was using his one phone call to contact me, directly violating the protective order. I should have hung up, should have reported it immediately, but I didn't. What do you want? I asked. I need you to help me. Tell them it's a mistake, that you made all this up because you were angry about the divorce. Please, Natalie. Please. I laughed. Actually laughed. You're incredible, you know that? I know you're angry. I know I messed up, but this is too much. They're saying I could go to prison for 20 years. You hit me, Garrett. You hit your pregnant wife. You lied to me for our entire relationship. You have another family you never told me about. You're a criminal. So yes, you probably are going to prison for 20 years. Maybe more. And you deserve every single day of it. You can't do this to me. I'm not doing anything to you. You did this to yourself. Every choice you made led you here. I'll make sure you never see a penny in the divorce. You don't have any pennies left to give. The government seized all your accounts. Or did your lawyer not tell you that yet? He was quiet for a moment. I could hear his breathing, ragged and desperate. Then I loved you, Natalie. I really did. Both of you. You and Chelsea. I loved you both. No, you didn't. You don't even know what love is. Love isn't control. It isn't manipulation. It isn't having secret families and secret bank accounts and secret lives. You never loved anyone but yourself. That's not true. Goodbye, Garrett. I hung up. He tried to call back twice. I blocked the number, reported the contact to Victoria, added it to the growing pile of evidence against him. The trial took 8 months. I was 7 months pregnant when I testified. Huge and uncomfortable. My feet swollen. My back aching. But I stood there in that courtroom and told the truth. Chelsea testified too. We sat together in the waiting room beforehand. 2 women bound together by the same terrible man. Have you thought about names? She asked, looking at my belly. If it's a girl, which they told me it is, I want to name her after my grandmother, Rose. That's beautiful. What about your daughter? You said her name is Lily? Yes. Garrett wanted to name her after his mother, Patricia, but I insisted on Lily. It was my grandmother's name. Rose and Lily, I said. That's nice. Like a garden. Chelsea smiled. It was the first time I'd seen her smile. Maybe they'll meet someday. Be friends. Maybe. The trial was brutal. Garrett's lawyers tried everything. They attacked my credibility, my mental health, my motives. They painted me as a vindictive ex-wife, making false accusations for money. They tried the same tactics with Chelsea, said she was a jilted girlfriend, bitter that Garrett had chosen me over her, conveniently ignoring that neither of us had known about the other. But the evidence was overwhelming. The financial records, the photos from the illegal gambling operation, the testimony from the forensic accountants, the witnesses who'd seen Garrett with known criminals. And then there was the laptop, Chelsea's laptop, with all of Garrett's carefully kept records of his illegal activities. He documented everything, every transaction, every meeting, every dollar, because he was a narcissist who believed he was untouchable, who thought he was so smart that he needed to keep records of his own brilliance. His arrogance was his downfall. Garrett was found guilty on all counts. He sat there in his expensive suit, his face blank, as the verdict was read. Guilty, 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 12 times. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. I didn't go to the sentencing. I'd already said everything I needed to say. My baby was due in 2 weeks, and I couldn't handle the stress. But Michelle went, and she told me about it later. Garrett had cried, actually cried, real tears, streaming down his face, begging the judge for mercy, saying he had families to support, saying he'd made mistakes but he wasn't a bad person, saying he deserved a second chance. The judge, the same Judge Morrison from our first hearing, hadn't bought it. Mr. Sutton, she'd said, her voice cold and precise. You systematically deceived and abused multiple women. You engaged in serious criminal activity over a period of years. You showed absolutely no remorse until you were caught. You exploited the trust of everyone around you for your own gain. This court has no sympathy for you. 18 years. He'd be 52 when he got out. I'd be 47. Our child would be 18. An adult. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks before I gave birth. I got everything. The apartment, though I planned to sell it. Too many bad memories. The car. What little money was left after the government took its share and the lawyers got paid, and the victims of Garrett's crimes were compensated. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And more importantly, I was free. Rose Elizabeth came on a Tuesday morning in October. 7 pounds, 6 ounces. She had my eyes and my sister's nose and absolutely nothing of Garrett in her that I could see. Michelle and Ryan were there. So was my mom, who'd flown in from Arizona. Even Chelsea sent flowers with a card that said, "Congratulations to both of you. May she have all the love we wished we'd had." I held my daughter and looked into her tiny, perfect face. Her eyes were closed. Her little fists curled up near her face. She made small, snuffling sounds. "Just us," I whispered to her. "Just us against the world. And that's going to be enough. More than enough." The nurses asked if I wanted to put the father's name on the birth certificate. I thought about it for a long time. About Garrett and everything he'd done. About the lies and the manipulation and the abuse. About the fact that he was sitting in a prison cell and would be for the next 18 years. About the fact that Rose deserved better than to have his name attached to hers in any official capacity. In the end, I left it blank. Garrett sent a letter from prison 3 months later. I recognized the return address from the Federal Correctional Facility in Lompoc. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was 4 pages long, single-spaced, tiny, cramped handwriting. He said he was sorry, that prison had given him time to think, that he understood now what he'd done was wrong, that he wanted to be part of Rose's life when he got out, that he'd take parenting classes, go to therapy, become a better man, that he loved me, that he'd always loved me, that I was the only woman who'd ever mattered, that Chelsea had been a mistake, that if I could just forgive him, give him another chance, everything could be different. He wanted me to bring Rose to visit, to let him see his daughter, to let him be a father, even from behind bars. I laughed when I read that part. Sitting in Michelle's living room with Rose sleeping in my arms, I laughed until tears ran down my face. "What's so funny?" Michelle asked, looking up from feeding Lucas. "Garrett says I'm the only woman who ever mattered to him." Michelle snorted. "What about Chelsea? Apparently she was just a mistake. An error in judgment. Is he serious? Dead serious? He wants me to bring Rose to visit him in prison. Please tell me you're not considering it. Not even for a second. Are you going to write back?" I looked at the letter, at Garrett's desperate, cramped handwriting, at all his empty promises and self-serving justifications, at the complete lack of real accountability or understanding of what he'd done. Then I looked at Rose, sleeping peacefully in my arms, her tiny chest rising and falling, her perfect little face. "No," I said. "I'm not." I tore the letter into pieces and threw it away. Life moved on. I sold the apartment and used the money for a down payment on a small house. Nothing fancy. A 2-bedroom bungalow in a safe neighborhood with good schools. It had a tiny yard where Rose could play, a front porch where I could sit and drink my coffee in the morning. I got a new job at a dental practice closer to my new house. The dentist who owned it was a kind woman in her 60s named Dr. Patricia Nguyen. She had 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren, and photos of all of them covering every surface of her office. She knew my story. I'd been honest with her during the interview, about Garrett, about the divorce, about everything. "Everyone deserves a fresh start," she'd said, offering me the job, "and everyone deserves to work somewhere they feel safe." Rose grew. She smiled for the first time at 6 weeks, laughed at 3 months, started started crawling at 7 months. Every milestone felt like a victory. I went to therapy, real therapy, with a woman named Dr. Simone Washington, who specialized in domestic abuse survivors. She was in her 40s, with warm eyes and a gentle but firm way of calling me out when I started making excuses for Garrett's behavior. It was hard. Some sessions I cried the whole hour. Some sessions I got angry. Some sessions I sat in silence, unable to find the words for what I was feeling. But slowly, week by week, I started to understand. It wasn't my fault. None of it. Not the abuse. Not Garrett's choices. Not the lies. Not any of it. I hadn't been too sensitive. I hadn't overreacted. I hadn't provoked him. I hadn't driven him to any of his behaviors. I was enough. I'd always been enough. The problem had never been me. Rose turned 1. We had a small party at my new house. Just family and a few close friends I'd reconnected with after leaving Garrett. Rebecca from college, who'd cried when I called her after 2 years of silence and apologized for cutting her off. I knew something was wrong, she'd said. I just didn't know how to reach you. Emily from my old job, who'd been so understanding when I explained why I'd quit so suddenly. If you ever want to come back, she'd said, we'd be happy to have you. Katie from the book club I'd joined again, who'd welcomed me back like I'd never left. These women, who I'd pushed away because Garrett had convinced me they were toxic, were now my lifeline. Chelsea called on Rose's birthday. She and Lily had moved to Seattle, started fresh. She'd gone back to school to finish her degree in elementary education. She was student teaching and loving it. How are you doing? She asked. Good, I said, watching Rose smash her face into her birthday cake while everyone laughed and took photos. Really good. I'm glad. You deserve to be happy. So do you. We talked for a while, about our daughters, about our lives, about how strange it was that Garrett had brought us into each other's orbits. Do you ever think about him? Chelsea asked. Sometimes, I admitted. Not as much as I used to. Mostly I just feel sorry for him. Sorry, he could have had everything. Real families, real love, but he was so busy trying to control everyone and prove how smart he was that he destroyed it all himself. He's sitting in a prison cell, and we're out here living our lives. Who really won? Chelsea was quiet. Then we did. We won. Yeah, we did. After we hung up, I sat on my porch watching Rose play in the grass with Lucas, who was walking now and trying to keep up with her. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink and purple. Michelle came out and sat beside me, handing me a glass of wine. You okay? She asked. Yeah, I said, I really am. You've come so far, Natalie. I'm so proud of you. I had. From that day in the kitchen when Garrett slapped me to now, it felt like a lifetime, like I was a completely different person. Thank you, I said, for everything, for taking me in, for believing me, for being there through all of it. That's what sisters are for. Rose toddled over and climbed into my lap, her hands covered in frosting and grass stains. I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the sweet smell of her baby shampoo. Mama, she said, one of her favorite words. Yes, baby. Mama's here. And I was. I was here, present, alive, free. Garrett sent another letter on Rose's first birthday, and then another on Christmas, and another on Valentine's Day, and another on my birthday. I didn't read any of them. I just wrote return to sender on the envelope and put them back in the mail. Eventually, they stopped coming. I heard through Victoria, who stayed in touch, that Garrett had gotten into a fight in prison and lost his privileges for 6 months. Then I heard he'd found religion and was attending Bible study. Then I heard he was taking college courses, working toward a degree in business. Good for him, I thought. But I didn't care. He was part of my past, a painful chapter that was closed and locked and buried. My life was about the future now. When Rose was 2.5, I met someone. His name was David Chen. He was a teacher at the elementary school near my work. We met at a coffee shop, both reaching for the last blueberry muffin in the display case. You take it, he'd said, smiling. He had a kind smile, warm eyes. We could split it, I'd suggested. We did. And then we talked for 2 hours. I was terrified at first. Terrified of being hurt again. Terrified of making the same mistakes. Terrified that I'd misread him, that he'd turn out to be another Garrett hiding behind a charming smile. But David was patient, kind. He didn't rush me, didn't push. When I told him I needed to take things slow, he said, of course, whatever you need. He listened when I talked about Garrett and the marriage and everything that happened. Really listened. Not with pity or judgment, but with compassion. He never made me feel broken or damaged. You're not broken, he said once, holding my hand across a restaurant table on our 4th date. You survived something terrible. That doesn't make you broken. That makes you strong. We took things slow. We dated for 6 months before he even met Rose. I needed to be sure. I needed to protect her, protect myself. When they finally met, Rose loved him immediately. She showed him all her toys, made him read her favorite book 3 times in a row, fell asleep on his lap while we were watching a movie. That should have made me happy, but instead it made me anxious. What if I was wrong about him? What if he turned out to be like Garrett? What if I was putting Rose in danger by letting this man into our lives? Dr. Washington talked me through it in therapy. Not everyone is Garrett, she said gently. You have good instincts. You know the warning signs now. Trust yourself. And month after month, David stayed consistent, steady, real. He didn't try to control me, didn't check my phone or track my location, didn't criticize or belittle, didn't isolate me from my friends and family. In fact, he encouraged those relationships. When we argued, which we did sometimes because we were human, he talked things through calmly instead of yelling. He listened to my perspective. He apologized when he was wrong. He never made me feel small. It took me a long time to trust it, to believe that this was real, that not all men were like Garrett, that I deserved this kind of love. But eventually, I did. Rose is 5 now, the same age Lily was when I first met her. David and I got married last spring, a small ceremony in my backyard, just family and close friends friends. Rose was the flower girl, taking her job very seriously, carefully dropping petals along the path. Michelle was my maid of honor. She cried through the whole ceremony. Happy tears, she said. My mom walked me down the aisle, holding my hand tight. I'm so proud of you, she whispered, for everything you've survived, for the life you've built. Garrett is still in prison. He's been denied parole 3 times now. He'll be eligible again in 7 years. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about us, about Rose, about the life he could have had if he'd made different choices. But mostly, I don't think about him at all. I don't think about him much anymore. Sometimes Rose asks about her father. She's at that age where she notices that other kids have dads, and she wonders about hers. I've told her the truth, in age-appropriate ways, that her daddy made some bad choices, and has to be away for a long time, that it's not her fault, that she is loved by so many people, that David loves her like she's his own daughter, even though he's not her biological father. When she's older, I'll tell her the whole story. She deserves to know. But for now, she's happy, thriving. She starts kindergarten in the fall. Chelsea and I still text regularly. We've become real friends, bonded by our shared experience, but also by genuine affection for each other. Our daughters did meet at a park in Portland when we drove up last summer. They played together like they'd known each other forever. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and healing all at once. They're going to be okay, Chelsea said, watching them on the swings. Yeah, I agreed. They are. They're going to be better than okay. Last month, I got a notification from the prison system. Garrett had tried to add me to his visitor list again. The 3rd time he'd tried. I denied it again. Victoria called to check in, like she always did when Garrett made any kind of move. You okay? I'm fine, I said. I don't have room for him in my life anymore. Good for you. You know, I've had a lot of clients over the years, but I've never seen someone rebuild their life as completely as you have. I had a lot of help. You had support, but you did the work. Never forget that. And she was right. I had done the work, the therapy, the healing, the hard conversations, the facing of my fears, the learning to trust again, and it had been worth it. Last week, Rose asked me if I was happy. We were sitting on the porch, watching fireflies in the twilight. David was inside cleaning up after dinner. I could hear him singing along to the radio, off-key and cheerful. Mommy, are you happy? Rose asked, her small hand in mine. I thought about it, really thought about it, about where I'd been 5 years ago, standing in a kitchen with a red mark on my face, realizing my marriage was a lie, about where I was now, sitting on my own porch, in my own house, with my beautiful daughter beside me, and a good man who loved us both inside, about the friends I'd reconnected with, the family who'd supported me, the therapist who'd helped me heal, the strength I'd found in myself that I never knew I had, about Chelsea and Lily in Seattle, building their own happy life, about Garrett in prison, facing the consequences of his choices while we lived free. Yes, baby, I said. I really, really am. And I meant it. That slap in the kitchen 5 years ago was the worst moment of my life. It was also the moment everything changed. The moment I stopped accepting less than I deserved. The moment I chose myself and my child over the illusion of a marriage. It was the beginning of the end of one life, and the beginning of another. Garrett is in a cell somewhere, counting down the years until freedom. But even when he gets out, he'll never be free. Not really. Because people like him are prisoners of their own narcissism, their own need for control, their own inability to truly love anyone but themselves. But me, I'm free. I won. And every day I wake up in my little house with my daughter and my husband, and I remember that. I remember that I survived, that I got out, that I built something beautiful from the ashes of something terrible. Chelsea won too. And our daughters will grow up knowing that they come from strong women who refuse to stay broken. That's the real victory, not the divorce settlement or the criminal conviction or any of that. The real victory is standing here, 5 years later, genuinely happy. The real victory is Rose. The real victory is being free.